Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to Next Economy Now. My name is Sean Berry, and I'm a partner and worker owner at Lyft Economy. Today, I am delighted and honored to have Dr. Shamini Jain join me. Dr. Jain is a clinical psychologist, scientist, author, and singer, recognized as a leader in a necessary revolution in science, medicine, and healing. She is the founder and CEO of the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, a nonprofit collaborative that connects scientists, health practitioners, innovators, and social entrepreneurs to advance the science and practice of healing. Welcome, Shamini.
So good to see you, Sean. So good to be here. Thanks for having me with you.
Yeah, great to have you. And I'd love to invite you to share some of your background and how you came to this work at the intersection of science and spirituality. And I'm also particularly interested to invite you to weave in your experience in arts and music and how that intersects with your work.
Absolutely. I grew up in a small town in South Carolina, surrounded by Baptist Christian friends. And I grew up as a Jan, like my last name would say. And so early on, I recognized that many of us have very different views of how we explored the spiritual realm. But the one thing that we all had in common was that nobody was really talking about dimensions of consciousness or healing in health. And so because I grew up in the Western world, I was really curious why some of the books I was reading, look, some of them had really provocative titles like Easy Journey to Other Planets, things like that. Understood, we wouldn't really necessarily be talking about those in school. But as I continued diving into these books and my own experience with sound, we did lots of chanting, mantra meditation, things like that, but also other forms of meditation. My friends, were really highly engaged in prayer. Nobody was talking about the impact that our connection with our spiritual life, however we define that, could influence our health. But yet all of these ancient traditions from indigenous systems all over the world were talking about that. And they felt like our connection with consciousness was really fundamental to understanding health. So that really set me on a path to wonder, what could we do to take some of these ancient understandings of consciousness and healing into the health sphere? And because I grew up singing, honestly, singing was just something that brought me back home to myself. It's like when the world was crazy, I could just sing to myself and it would kind of just bring me back to that place of soul, that place of spirit, uniting with consciousness, whether it was through formal mantra chanting or just singing the pop song of the day, back in the day. I felt that resonant vibration, and that really influenced me as a young person. When I did my undergraduate work at Columbia University, I was telling my professors then, neuroscience was just coming online. Eric Kandel was, kind of at the forefront. But really what was going on is, what part of the brain lights up when I raise my hand, something like that. So it was really rudimentary. And I said, there's something about vibration that we're not like fully grokking here in the scientific world. And because I was a singer, I was deeply interested in the effects of music and vibration in that way on health and healing. And I just sort of had to continue my exploration of vibration outside of the university, studying with, folks that were at the forefront of sound healing and still are, honestly, at that time, folks like Jonathan Goldman and John Beaulieu and Jeffrey Thompson here in the West, all these folks in the US that were really trying to explore what these ancient traditions said about the relationship of vibration with consciousness and sound as being a part of the way that could bring us back home to feeling our consciousness as embodied vibration, feeling our bodies as embodied vibration, really far out. And what I'll say is, eventually, and as you know, I talk about this in my book, it was when I had my first Reiki session that this became less abstract for me and more concrete, because I could really feel the vibration in my body. Whether we want to call it a sound or a light vibration, a lot of things that we could say, a lot of things we still need to explore scientifically. But here was a vibration I could feel that was being facilitated through my interaction with another human being who was just simply placing her hands on my body gently, lightly, fully clothed. And I could feel this movement in my body, this vibration, and I could feel its connection with my emotional and mental state. And I thought, wow, this is really profound. And because I was kind of a budding clinician at the time, I had finished my undergraduate, looking at graduate schools. I said, this is a vibration that's palpable, that seems to be meaningful, that it could be really helpful for patients. Like, who's studying this? Who's looking at this, the nature of this kind of energy healing, energy vibration? And how could we bring our understandings of energy healing and, for lack of a better term, scale them more broadly across health and healing sectors like hospitals and clinics so that patients could benefit? And so that's really what set me on my path, to study vibration in the way that I do as a scientist and, as a nonprofit healing research and innovation facilitator to do that work.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'm curious of, from your background in the sciences, and I was also in science as well in school. How was it received, with your peers that you were also active artistically and vocally? And like, did that seem, as separate directions, or I'm curious
Oh
how
yeah,
that.
they've been laughing. It's funny, it wasn't something they knew about because I actually shut it down. So as I mentioned, I was a singer and, from just meaning that I just realized I loved to sing from a really early age. And I actually ended up doing some training in high school. I sort of showed up to chorus practice and nobody else did in high school. And I said, oh, well, I could leave, since nobody else is here. And my teacher at the time was like, oh, no, it's fine. Let's just go over the songs. And she heard me and she's like, oh, can you sing this? Can you sing this? And then before I knew it, I was trying out for the school play. I did my first role as Bloody Mary in South Pacific. I'm kind of this very small person. So it was like, this tiny little Indian girl is going to play Bloody Mary in South Pacific. But apparently I had this really big voice. I didn't realize. So I set on exploring this from kind of Western singing perspective, ended up training as a coloratura soprano in high school and did a bit of that more in college. But when I set out to study this nature of vibration, because I was so perfectionistic about my singing, I decided that since I didn't decide to go on the path of pursuing singing professionally, I let it go. I let it go for like 15 years. And so it was when I was actually past graduate school, kind of full-fledged, academic and, running the nonprofit and, doing all the science stuff that I just, it's a long story of how I got there. I think I might have talked about it in my book, but the light went on for me because I started singing to my kids and I was like, oh, I miss this. I really miss singing and I can't believe I left it for so long. It's like a part of my soul. And I was so perfectionist about it. It was like, if I wasn't going to, sing opera, like there was no point. And long story short, I ended up being front row center for Axl Rose and his boy band, Guns N' Roses, before they actually got back together with Slash and all. And, I grew up listening to Guns N' Roses and I was like, wow, I always wanted to do a rock band. Like I always wanted to do that. And so I called up my friends and I was like, dude, I always wanted to do a rock band. I always wanted to have a Guns N' Roses cover band. And my friend's like, well, dude, we're getting old. So you're not going to do it now. You need to do it. So I had to really let go of my perfectionism. I was in San Diego at the time. I put out an ad on Craigslist. Like I had no idea what I was doing. I hadn't even sung in 15 years. And before I knew it, I had found the players, through Craigslist, had no idea they were great. I had this 17-year-old shredder on the guitar who could just shred, Slash up and down, awesome bassist, found a few drummers, found a really great drummer eventually. We downloaded this name, Nuns and Moses, and it was just like this ridiculous, my healing teacher always says, like, the path of enlightenment is through the ridiculous, and like I figured I was well on my way because I downloaded this name, Nuns and Moses. I was like, I'm going to let go of the perfectionism. I'm just going to do this for fun. I dressed as Moses. The dudes that were all straight men dressed as nuns. We just had a blast. I had just purely doing it for ridiculous fun. I had no idea San Diego had this serious rock tribute scene. And so before we knew it, we were doing all these venues. We became a Jeopardy question. I mean, it was just, like we were on Jeopardy. Like, I don't even know how it happened. And then I was asked to front an Iron Maiden tribute band. And I had never listened to Iron Maiden, But I gave it a listen and I was like, wow, these songs are epic. Like they're great storytelling. And I had music theater in my background. So I was like, okay, well, let's do it, man. And I got these giant wings and masks and sort of acted out the songs. That guys are really cool. And we were doing these great venues all over Southern California, casinos, House of Blues. And of course, my science friends were like, okay, and of course, my psychologist friends were like, oh, you're bringing out your shadow, and you're doing your shadow work. And I'm like, it's all vibration. That's how I saw it. It's definitely like the heavy metal is definitely more heavy vibration. It's a lot of fire, and you have to be really grounded to sing that stuff. It's quite athletic singing, actually. But I just really enjoyed it because I really tried to let go of the perfectionism while still honoring the craft. So instead of making it about me, which is what I had done in my early age, I just really dove into the vibrations and the stories of the songs and allowed myself to just be the storyteller, which is what I think, we can do as performers. We're storytellers. And, I never thought I'd write a book. I was kind of asked to write one by Tammy Simon of Sounds True. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. And it was scientific storytelling. That's what she wanted. And the bands were scientific. I mean, not scientific, but, musical storytelling. And so my life has just sort of been this, I guess you could say, devotion and allegiance to vibration and wherever it has taken me, just sort of saying yes to where I can be called to serve and where I find my joy. And so vibration has taken me into, and my allegiance to it, I would say, has taken me into the scientific study of it and the expression of it in different ways. I recently published my debut album called Kali Yuga Blues. That was a total emergence too. I never thought I could write songs. Like, again, who am I to write songs? You just have to get out of your own way. Like, it's not about you, right? It's just about what wants to come through. And some of those songs are personal, but honestly, a lot of them aren't. I mean, and you met my husband, Sean, so you know how an amazing fellow he was. But the first time he listened to my songs, really gave a deep listen, he got really like disturbed because there's some of the songs that are kind of heavy. And he's like, are those songs about me? Are those songs about us? And I was like, well, no, honestly, they're not, so don't worry. Like those sad and heavy songs are not necessarily about us, but that's just what came through because it was storytelling about the state of our world and where we were. We live in a kind of heavy, dense world right now. And so some of those songs are heavy and dense, and we're just sort of the processing behind, how do we deal with oppressive forces that are trying to dampen our energy, that are trying to like kind of suppress us mentally, emotionally, physically, energetically. And how might we move forward to kind of process those deep emotions that we need to process in order to be at our best service and still lead from a joyful place, even with all the density that we're experiencing in today's world. So, music and vibration have a beautiful role to play in helping us recognize our deepest gifts, our deepest truths, in ways that we can even come into joyful service, even in today's times. So I feel like creativity is really some of the most important activity that we can be engaging in. And it's not really about the product, it's about the process. And there's really lively conversations we can talk about here with, how does AI fit into this? But in whatever ways we feel called to express ourselves creatively, we have to recognize that we're really tapping into a field of vibration when we do that. And we just got to get out of our own way and let it come through. We're just alchemizing. And then we get sometimes these beautiful downloads, like this beautiful emergence. And it's really fun when we can be in alignment that way. And honestly, sometimes the way we have to work with vibration is just to process our emotions. And that's beautiful too. It's all beautiful.
What I'm hearing here is, I guess the way I'm taking it is there's a way that you're a much bigger being than any one of these categories. Science, exactly. Art, healing. So there's like a wholeness there that doesn't fit in any one. And there's also a way that you're, like you're saying, getting out of your own way, or you're kind of letting it come through you and maybe even surprise you of what comes through.
And it's relevant in innovation. It's relevant in science. The best downloads happen when you get out of your own way. We have to get out of that third dimensional thinking, even within academia. And I will say, I believe it's happening. The more and more, I sometimes joke that I'm a recovering academic, because we get conditioned, and we think we're so smart and we think we have all the ideas, but that's not really what science is about. Like, Science is about discovery and humility, because if we get out of our own way as scientists and say, I have a hypothesis, I'm seeing some phenomena that I think is pretty profound and might help us link things in ways we haven't really linked before, right? That's part of the discovery process, this collaborative process that we see increasingly now in science with linking together disciplines. That's my home field of psychoneuroimmunology, right? Even the term psychoneuroimmunology belies its origins. It's not one thing. It's a confluence of knowledge and wisdom that has been accrued through different disciplines. And when those disciplines come together in a way that's humble and saying, we know something and you know something, like, how do we come together to expand our understanding of reality and our place in reality? And that's how psychoneuroimmunology began. And that's how this field of biofield science, which, I've been shepherding now, helping shepherd along with others for several decades. That's how we're continuing to grow, is through not making it about ourselves and our ideas and thinking we're super smart on our own, but saying, I've accrued some knowledge and wisdom from my training. And how might I align that knowledge and wisdom with other disciplines to explore this area in ways that I personally may not have thought about, but where I might be able to contribute, right? It's very aligned with a co-op model way of thinking, really, because it is about like honoring those diverse streams of wisdom and knowledge to do something greater than we could do on ourselves. And that's, I think, the highest service that at this point as scientists we could really bring. And that is happening. It's really exciting.
So you mentioned biofield. Let's talk about that. And I'm curious, to hear you share your definition. I'm also curious about that specific term and the language to maybe reach or connect with people in ways that maybe more technical or more scientific descriptions would be less connective or meaningful to folks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a term. Biofield was a term that was coined in the 90s by a group of scientists and healthcare practitioners who met at the National Institutes of Science because they were trying to figure out how they could study and explain phenomena that they were seeing that was relevant for healing. And that included things like acupuncture, bioelectromagnetic devices that seem to be fostering healing, practices like qigong and even meditation and yoga, but also things that seemed really far out and to some people still do, like energy healing, right? What did they all have in common? They all said they were working with this energy. But that's actually not new, right? That's actually fundamental. This idea of energy and vibration is fundamental to so many, if not all, indigenous models of healing. And I will say indigenous systems, indigenous models of healing, whether you're calling it Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, native medicine traditions, because again, spirituality, the nature of vibration was never left out of the picture. It was actually an understanding that it's what connected us with our environments. We weren't separate from those environments. And when we learned to harmonize that energy, we could foster health and healing for ourselves and for each other. But the scientists decided to use this term biofield because scientifically they were trying to look for a way to bring together fields of energy and information that guide the homeodynamic functioning of a living organism. That's how they described it. And so in common parlance, we might say fields of energy and information that guide our healing process. That's what they were interested in, because we can look at what we call the biofield in so many ways. We look at electromagnetic readouts of cells. We look at electromagnetic readouts of the body. We can look at bioelectromagnetic exchanges between people and even between us and the earth. That's all part of biofield. But my scientist colleagues like to call biofield almost more of a perspective than a thing, because again, it's about looking at something from a vibratory lens, right? Whether it's through the lens of science and we're really drilling down in cell dynamics and what happens. By the way, there's incredible, as you know, I've talked about this in my research, there are incredible studies coming online now looking at what happens when an energy healer directs their attention and focus to cells and to animals who've been injected with cancer. Like, this is very real, rigorous scientific research that's published in some of the best science magazines or peer-reviewed publications like Nature's Scientific Reports, right? This is not science fiction, it's science fact. We actually employ this way of thinking so that we can do studies and even think of doing studies. Like, we're going to do these very rigorous controlled trials comparing healers with, quote, sham healers, and having them direct energy to cells that are healthy or cells that have cancer. And what might happen to those cells? And, well, there are several replicated studies at this point from places like MD Anderson Cancer Center, Harvard, University of Connecticut, showing that when these trained healers are able to just send energy to cells, and by the way, they don't even know whether the cells are healthy or cancerous, right? They're blinded. The healthy cells actually can grow in number or stay the same. But the cancer cells will actually decrease in number. They don't increase in number. They followed on with studies with animals, with mice. And they've shown, and again, all this is published. I go over all of this in my book. It's incredibly rigorous research, replicated. They didn't just do this one time. They have shown, among certain things, that in different models of energy healing, not just one healer, okay, different types of energy healing, external qigong, other types of practices, including therapeutic touch and others, that energy healing can slow down cancer metastasis, slow down the spread of cancer. And so they start drilling down into like the biological, what they like to call biological mechanisms. I don't think mechanism is the right term, and I'll explain that later if you want. I do talk about it in my book. But they're drilling down in those biological processes, and they found that, yeah, it slows the spread of cancer. Well, how is that happening? Well, we know that inflammatory cytokines get reduced. The expression of certain cells gets reduced or augmented. We've even seen the expression, and this is really relevant for those of us who might be science nerds listening. In the MD Anderson cancer studies that are published, and you can look at those, I reference every single study in my book. It's got over 600 peer-reviewed published references in it. They saw that this energy healing actually altered the expression of a molecule called PDL1 on cancer cells. And that's a really important molecule because when that molecule is expressed on cells, the immune system is able to recognize that those cells are cancerous and do something about it, right? Transform, necrose, like basically kill those cells, right? Recently, you'll see that everyone is on fire about the promise of this mRNA vaccine that now Neil deGrasse Tyson and others are like promulgating this and so excited about this vaccine that's able to improve the expression of PDL1 on these cancer cells. But what nobody is talking about is that 5 years ago, these scientists at MD Anderson Cancer Center showed the same thing. It just wasn't an mRNA vaccine. It was energy healing, right? So this is some of the promise of biofield science, because I'm not saying that we shouldn't look at the mRNA vaccine. That's absolutely fabulous. But why aren't we looking from the field perspective? Because again, if we talk about scalability, some people say, oh, Shamini, well, energy healing, that's not scalable. And I'm like, that's nonsense. This stuff is trainable. It's actually more scalable than one company fostering a particular vaccine where we still don't even know what potential side effects they have. So it's a whole different way of looking at medicine and the scalability of healing. It's incredibly disruptive, honestly.
Yeah, I want to build on that by, I guess, referencing my background in nuclear physics. And so in quantum mechanics, when you try to look at the energy in the vacuum, are you familiar with this? You have to basically subtract out the background energy, which is almost infinite, right? So,
So
the
funny.
the energy in the vacuum, which is, quote unquote, empty space or nothingness, is full of everything.
It's full of information, right? So that's
Yeah.
exactly what we're talking about, of shifting the thinking. I'll give you an example, even from our home field of psychoneuroimmunology. We understand that what we call a cytokine, which is an immune transmitter, functions differently according to its context. So there are certain cytokines that will actually foster inflammation or anti-inflammation. It can be inflammatory or anti-inflammatory according to its cell microenvironment. And so what we've been calling empty space or noise, I mean, it's the same thing with epigenetics, right? Junk DNA. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, no, that's not junk DNA. It's actually modulating the behavior, of the genes. We just didn't look at it that way. So all the stuff that we've looked at is junk and nothing. When we start looking at this from more of a systems perspective, and I think that's what biofield science is also leading us to in the healthcare system, right? What if we just sort of whittled away energy? It's meaningless. It doesn't exist. Like, that's actually not true. And boy, I can tell you, there's a lot of, I have no better word for this than ignorance. There's a lot of ignorance in the systems that have suppressed the knowledge of the biofield. I mean, here you've got these peer-reviewed published studies of the biofield stuff, and it's completely mind-blowing. If we continue to expand that research, and that's what we're working on with the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, and other university partners, is really expanding this research. It's going to shift the whole way we look at biology and healing in a way that is going to empower the person to know how powerful they are to heal themselves, and I know you're very interested in the placebo effect, and it's the same thing there, right? It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, here, I want to read a quote from your book on placebos. You say, "We need to reframe placebos better, from a model based on deception to a recognition that placebo elements are all based in consciousness." And I want to invite you to talk about, like, what's the level of placebo effect measured in clinical studies, right? Because it's massive.
Right.
And like, what level of results above placebo are considered clinically significant?
That's a
And
great
this is kind of
question.
like a frame of like the current paradigm versus the potential that's like right on the table.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all because of the way that we have viewed things. Even the word placebo, I shall please, is actually outdated. Okay. And I go into the whole history in the book and stuff, so I won't belabor all of that. So just breaking it down for those who want a quick update on, like, what have we learned about this so-called placebo effect? What we call placebo, first of all, we see in every form of medicine, whether it's drugs, whether it's surgery, or integrative health, integrative healing practices like acupuncture and other things. So we've also, because we love to drill down as scientists, kind of drill down on what do we mean by placebo and what are all those factors that contribute to what we call a placebo effect. And remember that placebo was created to basically say, is this drug, at the time it was antibiotics actually, is it helpful over and above, believing that we're getting a drug and not getting the drug? So what's at play there? Well, there's belief, right? I believe I'm getting healing, and I'm conditioned, to think that I'm getting healing, because typically, historically I've been tricked into thinking I'm getting a drug when I'm not, right? So my belief is that I'm getting something. What we call conditioning, which means, for example, if I went and I got a massage and my whole body relaxed, the chances are when I got on that massage table again, my body would relax in anticipation that I was going to relax, because that's just what happened last time. It's what we call conditioning and to affect learning. There's also relationship. There's so many studies that are showing that just a doctor's demeanor with their patients will influence their cellular outcomes, down to how long they might recover from a common cold. These are very rigorously controlled studies. Relationship matters. Set and setting matters. That is what we call the ritual. And we know this even from typical white coat studies. Again, like, there's something called white coat syndrome, which refers to what we call the nocebo effect, right? Sometimes people, when they walk into a doctor's office and they see that white coat, literally, their blood pressure goes up. But it goes the other way around too. You can create rituals that it will actually calm the nervous system and put it into a better place for healing. So, and meaning, what does the illness mean for me? What does it mean to get well? We have literally in science looked at all of these different placebo factors, or what we call placebo elements, to drill down on what exactly are we calling, quote, placebo. And it's really drilled down to those elements. And so those elements have profound healing effects, no matter what, quote, medicine we're getting. So it's all backwards, right? The studies are all backwards, because these I call placebo heal. Holistic elements that activate life force. If you don't like the term life force, call it holistic elements that activate salutogenesis, or the process of healing, HEAS, which is not as much of a fun acronym. But really, because you're going to see those elements in every single healing encounter. And so the question kind of topples everything that we know about how we address healing on its head, because is it really that quote active ingredient that's most important? Is it the drug? Is it the acupuncture? Or does this all work as an interconnected system? So instead of trying to make the placebo effect go away, we want to actually accentuate those factors because they're just going to help us heal faster with whatever medicine we choose. It's a systems way of looking at healing as opposed to a let's throw out what we don't think is important method so that we can demonstrate that this drug is better and everyone needs to buy it.
And then just on the scale, right? Some of the placebo effects can be up to like 75% effective, right?
Yeah. I mean, these so-called healing elements, these placebo elements in many cases are more effective than simply the quote drugs themselves. These are born out of not just one study, but systematic reviews and meta-analyses and things like drugs, for antidepressants and surgery. These so-called, minuscule placebo effects aren't even minuscule in many cases. They're really powerful. So again, these are healing elements. This is consciousness. This is how we interact with each other. This is how we create the setting for the body, mind, spirit to know what to do. And so again, it puts that power right back into our hands. And it doesn't mean, I really want to preface this by saying it doesn't mean that we shouldn't seek medical care. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't even consider whether we want to take a pharmacological drug or have a surgery. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but I do want to say that if we were ever told that there was nothing we could do for our illness, that we had no choice, that there was nothing modern medicine could do, because that's what the doctor might tell you, because just know that they're working from a very limited model, because even the placebo research alone shows you how powerful you are in your healing process, even if pharmacological medicine doesn't have all the answers.
So I'm curious to take this economically, because if we're concerned about healing and we're looking at results, as you point out, these healing elements, holistic elements activating life force are massively powerful, right? So wouldn't we start there? And then the impact of the physical substances is maybe a little bit better, or in some cases, right, they're undistinguishable between the background or the placebo effect in some of the clinical trials. So it's like, take it or not. But what really matters is you think somebody's helping you, right?
And sometimes we need that external help. We need that external perturbation. Let's talk about this first from a systems point of view on the healing process, okay? We can liken when we get stuck with a symptom, with an issue, to kind of like, let's consider it almost as like we're stuck in some sort of steady state. And we need some perturbation to the system to move us back into a healing state. That could be a healer, it could be a drug, it could be going to a concert, it could be a lot of different things, right? We need some kind of perturbation to the system to kind of move us into a better state that will facilitate healing in our bodies, in our minds, and in our spirit. So there's nothing wrong with asking for help. It's healthy. We are social beings. We are meant to ask for help. So when we say, yes, you can heal yourself, it also doesn't mean that you have to go it alone. And we get to choose, like, what's the evidence say? What does the evidence say for this treatment versus that treatment? And that's what our doctors are good for. They're supposed to help us kind of figure out, based on the evidence and what we know, what kinds of treatment regimens might be best for us and what kind of healers do I want to see, whether they're acupuncturists or energy healers or functional medicine doctors or diet, nutrition. From a systems point of view, and again, this is what indigenous systems of knowledge have always known, healing is an interconnected system. So the way that I choose to eat, the company that I keep, the doctors that I see, the ways that I run my energy and my support system all have an effect on my healing, because healing is interconnected. It's based on a system, and all of those factors matter for my healing. So that is super empowering right there, because we realize there are many, many different pathways to healing, and we can engage in one or many of them, right? So the more we think about healing as kind of perturbing the system in a way that's helpful, then that's helpful for us to kind of think about ways that I can heal. Now let's talk about it from like, how do we galvanize an ecosystem for healing? And maybe I'll just share about it from an energy healing perspective, if that's okay, because that's kind of what we've been working on in, the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, is how do we galvanize inner and outer technologies for healing change based on what we know of the biofield and the effects that these healers are having. So let's talk about energy healing for a minute. It's a huge focus of my book, this subtle energy healing, Reiki, therapeutic touch, laying on of hands, pranic healing, Satnam Rasayam. I mean, there's so many different practices. What do we know from the research, like the hard edge published research? These practices have been shown, born out of reviews of clinical trials, over 400 clinical trials, over 125 randomized control trials. Oh, also including things like energy psychology techniques like tapping, right? Those are included in this. These kinds of practices have been demonstrated in rigorous trials over many, many studies reviewed in systematic reviews and meta-analyses to be helpful for patients with chronic types of pain, for things like osteoarthritis, for anxiety, and even have biological effects. I mentioned some of the cell effects, but some of these effects, we've seen some improvements in immune system function and hormone function. So we already know that. And then the question is, okay, how do we work from an ecosystems model to help get these healers more out there? And so that is an ecosystems model, and that's what we're working on at the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, is to share, first of all, the evidence. And I can share stories of how when we have shared evidence, because a lot of decision makers in hospitals and clinics aren't aware of these studies, they're buried. It's sad, but like modern press, unfortunately, isn't talking about stuff like this, right? There's just lots of influences on media and stuff that kind of bury a lot of this research. So part of our goal is to help people understand what we know, what the impact has been on patients, where we need to go in research, and where the promise is. And so there are levers of change that we can kind of work on. A couple of years ago, we did a deep dive, kind of what we call a systems map of the space. What are those levers of change to kind of promote more awareness, more education, more training, and more research? So we're really approaching this at the Consciousness and Healing Initiative from a systems change model. And some of the activities that we're doing really relate to that model. So we'll be releasing a beautiful documentary on healing called The Energy That Heals. So you can go to theenergythatheals.com, all one word, to watch the trailer for this beautiful film. We're submitting it to film festivals this fall, and we'll have a public launch of this documentary, making it available to the public as a way to just open the conversation so that people can learn. And for those who are healers or doing work in this field, they can use it as a communication point and say, I want you to watch this film. We've got the VP of Scientific American in this. We've got researchers from top tier universities like Harvard and UCSD and others, but we also have patients that are sharing their experience. Some of those patients are scientists, by the way, saying, yeah, I didn't believe in this, but I decided to try it. I had cancer and then I was surprised. I don't know how it works, but it did for me. Those are N of one studies, just sort of humanizing that. So that's some of the ways. We're also bringing together key stakeholders, like I mentioned. The way forward is through humility and collaboration. So a lot of our work is to bring together healers who are actually actively doing this work with different kinds of patients, with scientists and innovators and stakeholders who need to help galvanize a whole economic ecosystem around this, so that we can say, how do we bring biofield therapies, these energy healing therapies, out of the spa to communities? Great to go, and get your aura fluffed, as people like to joke, in the spas, but how do we make this more accessible? So that's one way that, we're kind of exploring. How do we bring this out more at the community level, not just at the spa level or even at the hospital level, although we want to bring this into the hospital and clinic level. And then how do we take insights from healers and explore the scalability of this and the exploration of how we elevate the field? Look, everybody's had this experience of, when they walk into a room and they just feel totally elevated and charged, and like the alignment is there and they feel like they're really just connected. They leave feeling better than they did when they walk in. Can we develop technology that's almost like a social biofeedback that can actually measure those energetic changes in the room and, help us demonstrate? Like sometimes we just need that real-time feedback, right? Biofeedback kind of changed the landscape on how we viewed our bodies and our abilities to affect change in our bodies. What if we start developing technology that helps us understand how we affect a room? when we come in, for better or worse. So there are all these ways that we can kind of explore this intersection of the field and technology to kind of foster greater personal and societal coherence. And, we're bringing together those stakeholders and really excited for the next advancements in the field.
Wow, thanks for all that. And one of the ways I'm holding it, like, just in terms of the economics impact, right? So there's this kind of clinical scientific studies model, which my understanding is it's massively expensive, right, to bring in a new pharmaceutical drug, like maybe $500 million or something like that. But if we're watching the results, we're looking at these placebo elements of being way more impactful and way less expensive, right?
Yeah, it's
And so
about influencing clinical practice guidelines. It's about, making sure healers have certifications to get into the clinics and practice. We do need research. It is critical. Do we need $500 million of research? I don't think so. For each drug? Absolutely not. Do we need investment in research, on a scalable level? Absolutely. It's really important because we need to know who these practices work best for, under what circumstances, which practices might be better. How do we teach people how to do this on their own and with their families? And research is going to help tell that story and influence those clinical practice guidelines. But we're not talking about needing to put $1 billion into one or two drugs. We don't need to do that. We do need research, though. And, there's no end to it. Well, of course, scientists love to tinker and, but imagine that we create open source technology that helps us amplify our field, see our field in real time, recognize this is the holy grail, okay? And it's going to happen. I'm not like, mark my words, but it's going to happen, okay? We're going to develop technology that is able to see perturbations in a person's energetic field to prevent disease before it starts. That's going to happen in the next 10 years. I'm calling it. It's way overdue.
Well, and what I love about all this is it's way more impactful and way less cost, especially with externalities, environment. And then there's so much more connection between people. It's like you're saying, we all need help, but it's a very different interaction if I see a doctor and then pick up a script at the pharmacy. It's a very different interaction than, if I'm with a healer or a community that's warm and connected and, a sense of belonging. So at least for me, I get a lot of excitement and inspiration of what healing could look like. And yeah, we need the allopathic, trauma and, those type of things. If I break my leg, I don't want, herbs and a blessing. I want, I want the bones put back together. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And then
exactly.
work on the healing.
Yeah. So true.
So,
there's a place for all medicine,
So what's next for you as we're kind of bringing our conversation to a close, but I'd love to hear kind of what's next and maybe what our listeners could do to support your work.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I want to invite people to continue to join the conversation. We have wonderful guests that come to our free Friday webinars at the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. So you can go to webinarsonhealing.com and it'll take you to our webinar page where you can join freely. They're usually the first Friday of every month. They're live, at this point where you can join in and join the conversation and even ask questions of our guests. We have leading lights in healing practice, healing science, healing change. So I invite guests to come to webinars on healing and join the conversation. Learn more about the nonprofit and ways that you can join and support. Learn about the documentary. If you go to chi.is, that's CHI.is, Consciousness and Healing Initiative, or chi.is. It'll take you to all the cool things going on. You have free resources, our report for systems change, our healing systems change map, research, all kinds of things are on there. If you're interested in connecting with me on a more personal level, I do some teaching. I've got some workshops that I often do at, leading retreat centers here in the US, including Esalen. I have one upcoming. That one I think is sold out, but there is one at Sivananda Ashram in the Bahamas, which is a beautiful place to be, right on the water, where I'm doing a beautiful program called Embody the Goddess, and that is in November. So it's really about how do we align with the flows of divine energy and principles to foster healing and change in ourselves and others. You can go to shaminijain.com. That's hard to spell. So you can also go to healingourselvesbook.com. That'll take you to the webpage for my book and also connect you with my website, learn more about the album. And you asked, what am I excited about? Yeah, I'm really excited for us as a humanity to take this very trying time where we really see a lack of leadership and the shadow aspects of human consciousness, and continue to do the joyful work of alchemizing that through our own creativity and connection. That's our medicine. That's what we're being called to, is to recognize the divinity in ourselves. And for those who are struggling, which I often do, I think we all do, when we're barraged by bad news, an invitation to gather in community, be resourced by the people and places and things that nourish you, give in to your creativity, because that's how we're going to create the beautiful world that we know in our hearts is the world that we deserve to live in. So that's my invitation to folks. Know that you're a creative being. Explore where creativity wants to take you. From my perspective, I'm really excited because I'm starting a new Rock Goddess collective chapter here in the Carolinas. One of the other things that we've done, if people go to rockgoddess.band, that's another music project that's continuing to flow, and it's all about women empowering music and singing the songs of women rockers from the 50s to the present day. So that's a really fun project that I'm excited about on the creative side.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for being with us, Shamini, and just really appreciating who you are in this world and the beautiful work that you're bringing. And yeah, I have a lot of hope and joy about the impact of your work. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Sean. And thank you for all the beautiful work that you're doing to help people understand how economy can be put in right relationship between each other and with the earth. I'm so deeply grateful for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, well, they're complementary for sure, right?
Yes, exactly.
Back to the wholeness. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, and we'll look forward to hearing how your work progresses.
Thank you, Sean.
Take care.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. If you enjoyed this conversation and are looking to dive even deeper into the B Corp movement, you'll love our new podcast, Beyond the B, hosted by Lyft Economy's Amy Allison and me, Ryan Honeyman. Beyond the B is your insider's guide to the B Corp movement. You'll learn about the new B Corp standards shaping our community, how the B Corp movement is navigating the various tensions and challenges of growth, and how businesses like Patagonia are putting their commitments to people and planet in practice. Check out our latest episodes and free resources at lifteconomy.com/beyond. You can also subscribe to Beyond the B on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening.